Really, these stories are about the human condition, and they're the extremes of the human condition, but they're about what people will do for love, the sacrifices people will make, and it is incredible to get to see what a human being will do for love, and I think that they're stories that deserve to be told.
22-year-old filmmaker Aiden Keltner has been inspired by his own lived experience with close family members diagnosed with serious mental illnesses, and he has created an award-winning short film and is developing different feature films on this subject. The film is available for anyone to watch for free, and he's our guest. Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randye K. We're going to start off episode 103 with an excerpt from the trailer of a movie called Amazing Grace.
You know, as I was waiting for Isaac to get out of the ER, a thought crossed my mind. What if he doesn't come out? I won't have to go buy cigarettes for him on the way home. And I thought about it for a second. I imagined myself falling asleep without hearing him screaming at the voices every night. I couldn't even look at myself the next day.
I don't know a family member dealing with serious mental illness that hasn't felt like that at some time or another. That's from a movie called Amazing Grace, and it's an underrepresented story from the mental health community by a young man who's a friend of the podcast, Aiden Keltner, and we're going to talk about it. Aiden, will you please turn on your camera and join us? Welcome.
Of course. Yeah, thank you,
Hi.
Randye.
You're welcome.
It's great to see you all. I just want to say thank you all for doing this podcast. Randye and Mindy, I got a chance to visit you guys, and it's great to meet you, Mimi. But I just want to say thank you for the work that you guys do, because I know how much it means to so many people across the country who care for a family member with a serious mental illness or have a serious mental illness. But I also know as a filmmaker, it has helped me a tremendous amount in my research. So I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much. Let me share a little bit about this film. First of all, we have mentioned you many times. You've never been on the podcast, but you and I had a Zoom call, and you went to Mindy's house, and you've done some focus groups. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be seeing a picture of what went on. And when you came to my house, in the room that my son is currently sleeping in for a week till he moves to his own apartment, hopefully, if I don't kill him first. Sorry, that was a that was a little like the trailer there, but anyway, that'll come out in the podcast. We did our focus group on Zoom from my home with various people from across the country, but at Mindy's house, you got to meet with people, and you continue to do research. Let me read a bit about the film. It says, straight from your website, based on the true stories of many families, Amazing Grace tells the story of a single mother caring for her adult son with schizophrenia. And I've got to say, the performances are unbelievable. They're just wonderful actors. You brought out wonderful things in them. Aiden, you're the filmmaker, director, producer, correct?
Yeah. I wrote, directed, edited, and produced it. Yeah.
Amazing. And, continuing to do research and focus group. And as we mentioned last season, this film is a 3-time Emmy Award recipient. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Best Arts Entertainment Program, Best Director, and Best Performer by the woman who played the single mother, Deborah Gilmore. Is it Smyth or Smith?
Smyth. Yeah, and
Smyth
she's
with a Y.
just incredible. I mean, you mentioned the performances, and that really has to do with the fact that both Debbie and Jake, who played the son, are both incredible theater actors who deserve a tremendous amount of credit. She's dedicated her life to performing on stage. So this was actually her first film, and she really knocked it out of the park. Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Amazing.
Now, I do know that I was able to access the full film finally on Vimeo. Is that because I had a link, or can anybody see it on Vimeo?
Anyone can see it on Vimeo. Yeah, so that link that I sent you, which will be in the show notes,
Yep.
anyone can check it out. So
Mhm.
yeah.
In fact, I have put it on Facebook now, and so I'm getting reaction both from people who react on Facebook, but also people I've talked to, and it really strikes a chord. And Aiden Jim watched it today in preparation for this. I wanted to hear what he thought about it. And his face as watching it really hit home with him. He was very sad to be watching it, but afterwards he thought it was very realistic, very realistic. And another one of our previous guests, which I won't name her here, but she added in that she and her mother watched it together, and they thought it was very, very sad and depressing. But she didn't say it wasn't realistic. As Randye said at the beginning, this hits home with all families who deal with schizophrenia. So I think it needs to be shown as it is, and you have done that so well. So thank you. It's incredible to have a young person like you starting out your career and picking this topic. So thank you.
Thank you, Mindy.
So where did that come from? Like, why this topic?
Yeah,
That was I can tell by Mimi's face. That's exactly what she was going to ask.
totally. Yeah, and if you have anything to add on, Mimi, let me know. I'm happy to answer anything else. But yeah, so a little bit about me. I have close family members with bipolar disorder. I have lots of mood disorders in my family. I do not have close family members who have psychosis. I have slightly distant family members who experience psychosis in mania. But my personal connection to the mental health field is really through mood disorders, and also because my dad's a psychiatrist. And so I really learned more specifically about this relationship quite a while ago. But when I was younger, I was in a car with my dad where he took a call and he had to tell a mom to call the police on her son. And I started learning more about this subject, and I basically became more and more connected about it because I felt like I could understand the role dynamic. My own mom, as I mentioned with you, Mindy and Randye, is incredibly empathetic and loving and caring. And when I was younger and had more emotional instability, she was always there for me and she supported me no matter what. And I think I could understand that relationship where someone doesn't necessarily care that much about themselves, and yet someone is there for them, caring for them even through that. And I feel like I see that a lot in the relationship dynamic between a caregiver and someone with a serious mental illness. And I thought that is a very beautiful thing. It can be very painful, especially for the caregiver, but it somehow to me seems kind of pure and honorable. And I wanted to learn more about it. So I did more research. Before and after making this film, I did focus groups, as you mentioned, with you, Mindy and Randye. I also did one in Oakland, and I did a couple of trips. I just did one in Florida with the author Patrick Dillon, and then I also did one in Oakland. And I mentioned I did a focus group there, but I also did a visit to Petaluma, California. And one thing I was thinking about when you mentioned showing the film to Jim, a lot of this film was based on one woman who I visited in Petaluma, California. And I visited her a few times before and after finishing the film. And a lot of the reason that the film is so heavy is because a lot of it's based on her personal experience. And after completing the film, she actually showed the film to her son while we were all there. And it was an interesting experience. I was afraid that he would feel sad about it or be affected by it and feel hurt. And I think it was powerful and painful in some ways, but he actually really connected with it. And it was really interesting being able to have a conversation with him about the film. because he had lived through a lot of those things, like the opening scene where the mom drives her son to the hospital after he ODs, and then she says the Lord's Prayer and he says it back. So, yeah.
Yeah, there were scenes that, well, in the film, Grace is a single mother. And so you so subtly tell the story by just showing pictures of her with her son when he was a baby. Every guest that we've had on, and we all have pictures of ourselves as young mothers with our beautiful little boys, and that happens a couple of times in the film. And Deborah's face just reflects what all parents feel when they look at baby pictures of any of our children, but especially children that have turned out a far cry from what our hopes and dreams for them were. So that was so so beautifully done. And there were some softer moments between the two of them where the love was evident, but also the severity of his illness was evident as well.
Yeah, I'd like to just say, aside from the subject matter and how it applies to what all of us are doing, as a film, Aiden, it really was beautiful and powerful. And something that we've talked about here is, and I've also talked about in working with developing my book into a screenplay with different screenwriters, is how difficult, if not impossible, it is to depict and make a viewer understand psychosis without it seeming hokey or weird or too theatrical. And what you did it. And, I've had arguments with people about it, because what I've always said is the way to do it is not to show the hallucinations as, cartoon characters or something like that. And I mean, the subtlety and the deftness with, in your artistry is really beyond your years. I'm very impressed.
Thank you. Yeah, I also just have to give a lot of credit to my cinematographer, Akash Raj, because it was definitely a collaboration between both of us. But yeah, it was a really beautiful process to get to do, and that's one of the things that I love about this medium, is it is really a collaborative medium, and it is a process of being able to show up on set, being able to exchange ideas and cohesively create something together, which is really amazing. I'm sure you guys get the same thing.
This word beautiful a couple times. You just used it to describe the commitment of mothers to children who demand or need this kind of care, and you just use it again. And I mean, it's very interesting to me as a painter, because although I would never have picked this, and certainly never have chosen it for my son, I have found so much beauty in this nightmare. It's informed my artwork, it's informed my writing, it's informed my life. And yes, if I could make my son not have schizophrenia, of course I would. But as far as how it's affected my life, it's enriched it so much. I don't know if I would want to not have that beauty in it. And I can see in this film that you see that, you feel it.
Yeah. I just want to piggyback on that, because there are two things that I find really interesting, or one thing that I'm thinking about now. But the reason, you asked Randye why I choose to talk about the subject area. And I think that what I find amazing when I do these focus groups and go on these trips is I'm always utterly amazed by the people that I meet and the stories that I hear, because really these stories are about the human condition, and they're the extremes of the human condition, but they're about what people will do for love, the sacrifices people will make. And it is incredible to get to see what a human being will do for love. And I think that they're stories that deserve to be told. So I totally get what you mean, Mimi, because I think that, we never know. We don't really get to choose what happens to us in our life, but we get to choose how we respond to it. And to be able to have a situation that's difficult, but be able to act from a place of love and commitment to those you care about, I think is an amazing thing to do.
And I am not an artist, so I don't see the beauty in things as much as Mimi does. So one thing I really liked about this film, and it was beautiful, and just the, views of the ocean and everything was beautifully done. The flapping white coats at the end when the team at the hospital was taking in Isaac after his overdose. But I really resonated also with the mother who had a dream about her son, that she was strangling him. And afterwards, she thought, boy, if he had died, I wouldn't have to go and buy him cigarettes anymore. And you could see she didn't answer the question from the psychologist about her real
Regrets.
thoughts.
Do you have any regrets? I think was the
any
question.
regrets? Thank you, Randye. That's what it was. I just like those parts too, that were just brutally honest. And I think if deep down, in addition to the beauty, there has to be that honesty for most people. So I appreciated that as well.
Yeah. So I would like to know how we can help you, because I understand you're thinking of expanding this. Like, I'd like to know what happens to this film now that it's an award-winning film and it's on Vimeo. Like, how can this film reach out and kind of be its own advocate now that it's a complete, it's kind of in a way like our books. And by the way, if you're new to the podcast, I know we're sort of assuming you know us all, but the Jim we're referring to is Mindy's son, who has schizophrenia. Mimi's son is Nick. My son is known as Ben, and we each have written books about it. And now Aiden has this beautiful film. And once something is complete and out there and has won its awards, it's like out there in the world. So I'd like to know what's next for the film and what's next for you. How can we help you?
Thank you, Randye. Yeah. Well, I think, as you mentioned, at this point, the work is kind of out, and I hope that it can be a touchstone for people, so that they can look at and say that this is an experience that I understand, or this is an experience that I've lived through. And one of the things that I found interesting was, after releasing the film this past Sunday, I got to see a post from someone who I didn't know, who just shared the film and said that it was something that I think the line was, take a look behind the curtain and see the pain that can happen behind the doors of caring for a loved one with a serious mental illness. And that I found really powerful. And I was glad, because ultimately the reason we chose to release it on Vimeo in this way, and it has free access to anyone who wants to share it or see it, is because I want it to be used by the people who have lived this as something that they can touch to, as an experience that they understand. And so I'm glad that it can be shared, and that's the hope. I'm going to possibly do some screenings with the Treatment Advocacy Center. Mindy was kind enough to connect me with the folks there, which was really great. And then we're going to also talk to SNPAA and some other organizations about doing some of that work as well, and some chapters of NAMI as well. So
and once again, if you're new to the podcast, that's the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance and National Alliance on Mental Illness. So go ahead.
Totally. Yeah. And so we're doing those screenings. And then I have been expanding this project. The main thing for me will just be about finding ways to get the films made. Just because filmmaking costs a lot of money, you have to know the right people, and you have to be able to either hire actors who have connections so that studios want to invest money, or you find money to invest yourself. So it can be very difficult, but I have a few different projects I'm expanding. I just did a short film that Mindy was a consultant on, called Crane, and that was done with the Voices with Impact grant. And so that film we currently are submitting to film festivals, and we're in the festival circuit. And then we'll be releasing that film online probably as well, probably sometime next year or the following year. And that's another short film, but then I'm developing feature films. And so the hope is, if there's anyone listening on the podcast who is able to support projects, that is great. Right now, I'm developing a project with the author Patrick Dillon. We're working on a project, and that's why I visited him in Florida. Is we had connected through Crane, and he had talked to me about wanting to develop a project. So we've been working on that for the past couple months. But yeah, I'm very excited about being able to create a feature film, a full-length film, and continue telling these stories that I think deserve to be told.
Can
All
you
right.
tell us a little bit about Crane?
Yeah, so Crane is about a girl whose father has a serious mental illness, and he is in a psychiatric hospital. And it's about her journey going with her mom to visit him in the hospital. And it's a shorter film. It's only about 7 minutes, and it's really grounded in the perspective of the girl. So the approach was really focusing on this kind of distance and innocence and the juxtaposition of the innocence and love that this girl has for her dad and that he has for her, juxtaposed with the realities of psychosis and the difficulties that come with that.
And Jim actually helped with that one too, because
Yeah.
he remembered what clothes people wore and what kind of socks he wore in the psych ward and so forth. And so he
That was
was really
super helpful.
happy to help with it too.
Yeah, that was
Kind of
wonderful.
that idea of that innocence and through the eyes of somebody that young. Because I remember when my son first got sick, I've got 3 daughters and my son, and the youngest daughter was very young. She was 9 years old, and she has her PTSD and stuff to deal with for everything that went on. But she's always been able to accept Nick for who he is, because she didn't have this whole plan of who he was supposed to be. This is the Nick that she's always known. And so there was not the same kind of adjustment that comes with the breaking apart of dreams and hopes and things like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well. I mentioned visiting that woman in Petaluma, and one of the last times that I went, I remember just like being able to witness a conversation between them, because I was in the kitchen and they were in the living room, and it was right before I was going to leave. And I remember they were sitting together, and her son said, I want to live a life that I'm proud of. I want to live a good life. And she was comforting him, and she said, I love you now. I don't just love who you were, I love you now. And I found that line really powerful. And that's what is kind of tragic. There is this reality that you no longer have the person who you once did. And sometimes people have really amazing outcomes and they're able to get back to just basically who they were. But it's amazing also when you can support someone, even if they are having a really difficult time, and still show love and care for them, no matter what they're going through. Yeah.
And there definitely are moments like that. There are also moments that are more like Grace's, wow, what if I didn't have to buy cigarettes? And that's one thing when we connect with other families that are going through what we're going through, we realize that the beautiful thoughts and the dark thoughts are all there, and they're all human. And listen, my son is temporarily living with us, which was fun for about 12 hours and then not so much. And well, I can say more about it, but I will say that for the first time in my life, I got so angry, and my husband's laughing about this now, but I actually just threw a glass of water in his face. Not the glass, just the water. I was so, I just didn't know what to do. And he just kept going on and on and on. And it was like such shades of scenes from my book when he was an adolescent. And I know he's going through a lot. He's just gotten out of 14 months of structure in jail and basically a halfway house jail diversion program. And he's about to go into his own apartment. And my head knows that there's a lot happening. And he's not a teenager, and I can't give him a curfew, and it's just like, biding time. And I know he's spinning, there's a lot happening, and he's on his medication. But we had a really, really difficult night and a big fight about why can't he have all his money. And so, I am not a cursor. I don't curse, but my husband said I use the F word more in that night than I have in our entire marriage. So I just lost it. I'm not like a perfect person. And then then there are moments, first thing he wanted to do was buy presents for his nieces and nephew because he missed their birthdays when he was in jail. So
Yeah.
there's the good and the beautiful moments, and I love you, and thank you so much for sticking up for me. And then there's moments like that. And it's true of any relationship, but I think it gets really exaggerated when it comes to an unknown like mental illness. So, you know, it's complicated. So with that in mind, what would you like to ask us?
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was something that we kind of talked about beforehand that I have really enjoyed being able to learn from all of you guys, whether visiting in person or just through the podcast. And there are some things that I'm curious to hear from you guys about what you hope to see in film and media, and also what you hope to see in future generations. So to start, I'm just curious what you hope to see in depictions of serious mental illness in film and TV.
Well, I can answer that for myself. Things, first of all, more of the caliber of what you've done in terms of the biting reality and the beauty. And, again, for me, when I say beauty, I'm not talking about the surface beauty that, it's a pretty scene or the lighting's good. Granted, all that was there. I'm talking about the beauty in the scene when the mother says, "Oh, I won't have to go get cigarettes." That's a poignant moment. That's a beautiful moment. And I think that what we need to see, what I yearn to see, is mental illness depicted and families depicted with people who are non-typical or even with serious mental illness, where that person is just part of the story. That person is just in the world, in his life, in the story. I'm dying to see, and I want, this is what I would love to do, is a story about a family like ours, mine, yours, where you have a kid with schizophrenia, and that's part of the story. But the brothers and sisters are part of the story, and the parents are part of the story, and that person exists in our world. We need to depict it, integrate it into our world. Everything we see about SMI shows them either off in jail, off in some crazy psychotic world of their own, or, in the streets. There aren't even mental hospitals anymore. And so they're treated and regarded not dissimilar from lepers, where we just want to shove them away where we don't see them. So that's what I want to see in film, in movies. I want to see the talk and the depiction of our families.
Thank you. Yeah,
and not as a tragedy, just as a life.
totally. Yeah. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would. Mindy usually has a lot to say on this. She's thinking, I can see her face. So, I would just in a general way like to see more representation of people of other colors and cultures. And, here we are, 4 white people talking about the problem. So I get that. And maybe you're not the filmmaker to do that. I don't know. But, and maybe that's more of a documentary. I don't know. I would like to see more because I would like to learn about how it's handled in other cultures. And so that's one thing, but also what I would love to see, because every film has to have drama. And I'm learning from a class I'm taking that a good story goes from lofty values to everyday values, so that, wanting to like, oh, I want my son to graduate mid school. And maybe by the end of the film, realizing that, what, he can come to a family reunion and that's amazing. Like, so that's kind of the story arc. But I would like to see anosognosia as part of a story of mental illness. And if there is some way that somebody with schizophrenia finds a path to that light bulb going off. And what goes up goes down. So I never think anything's here forever. But for the first time this week, my son, he's 42, for the first time in his life, he called me up. He goes, I think I might have this illness. And I, set off fireworks, and it's huge. And now he could totally change his mind. But you know what? It can never come from me. It came because he was talking to a friend who he hasn't seen in a year. And this friend is someone who's on medication for MS, it's different illness, but who said, yeah, I'm not saying your mom's, I'm just saying, let me just tell you what symptoms I've observed in you.
Mhm.
And because it didn't come from me, it was more acceptable. And that's the story of any adolescent. They'll believe a friend before their parents. And there's this concept of people with serious mental illness kind of being frozen in time emotionally when their brain began to change. And so I have never seen anosognosia be changed by relationship and how it's done. And, this is a baby step, and it's, one step forward, two steps back, or two steps, or whatever it is. But it was the first time ever that, and he even said the same thing to his sister, that he was even willing to say, look, I don't see things, I don't hear things, but maybe I have this, but I'm willing to think about it. And that was a huge thing that may go nowhere or may go somewhere in 5 years. I don't know. But that was interesting to me, that coming from a source, the mother can't do everything, and especially cannot convince someone that they have an illness, at least in my experience. So that's something I'd like to see addressed in film as part of a story, like just like an aha moment and where it came from.
Totally.
So I have, yes, I'm always the one harping on, we need more people of color on this program. So Randy's previewing that topic, that I might say is one of the things. And I have a story that I heard from a Somali man who was speaking at the same conference I was this spring. And his brother has schizophrenia. And in the Somali community, it's much more not talked about than most cultures. And they believe that I think the word was binged or something, where you are cursed. If it's your family, it's got to be your fault. And so they really have that strong reason for not sharing it. But yet here he was talking about it at this conference, and he shared about his brother. He's some sort of a lecturer or professor at the University of Minnesota, I think. And he, however, was speaking about it. His brother was in danger of being deported because of his illness. He couldn't concentrate on the citizenship test, which a lot of people like us couldn't pass either. And he had 7 years to pass it. Or here he was going back to Somalia, the war-torn country, with his schizophrenia, without his family, unless they chose to go back with him, because he couldn't pass the citizenship test. So this brought his brother to speak about it, this problem. And I actually did connect him with some advocates to try to do something about it. But there's a very poignant story about another culture, people of color, that I think would be a beautiful, some sort of film. I also asked Jim, because I knew you were going to ask us this question, and Mimi said it would be too hokey, but it was the topic that Jim suggested, and that is to portray psychosis and talk to people like Jim and all the other people that do have insight into their illness, that can talk about what they see, what they hear, and how at the beginning it's very friendly, and then it gets rough and mean and scary. And now Jim is terrified to go into psychosis because it picks up where it left off. It doesn't go back to the beginning when it was nice. So he thinks that to have the general public know the kind of suffering that's going on inside of his head would be something that only film could do. And then my third topic, and the one for me that I came up with, is the one Randy just talked about, actually, and that is anosognosia. I just think that is such a misunderstood topic by all the professionals. The psychiatrists don't always get it, the police officers, the mental health workers, the general public. Everybody just thinks the people should shape up, or if you shake them enough, they will understand they have an illness. And the idea that it's, brain dysfunction and they can't know what's the matter with them unless they get proper medication. And then, as Randye said, that aha moment, which for some comes very early, and then they are the ones that can have a good life and achieve high things. People like Bethany Iser from Cures totally understands her illness, and it happened when she got on the drug clozapine. So that transition for somebody, some storyline of someone who was refusing everything just inexplicably, and then they finally saw the light when they got the right help, I think would be a beautiful story, and it would educate so many people.
Definitely. Yeah.
A quick thing, apropos of what you said, Mindy, what I was saying to clarify is not that it's hokey to show the images of psychosis, but that when it's done, it always looks hokey because it's so hard to do. And Aiden, there's something that I'll look for, and if I can find it, I'll send it to you. I found a video on YouTube where they showed from point of view of the person with schizophrenia, taking the information from interviews and research of people, like you were saying, Mindy, and him walking into a 7-Eleven type store and just going through the store, and you could hear what he was hearing in his head. And it was so well done and so chilling. That was one of the other ones I've seen where you really got it. It's when all of a sudden you've got animated cartoons and things like that. It just, to me, takes away from the seriousness of it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you for that clarification.
And I will say, Aiden, there's something in Amazing Grace that was so poignant to me when Isaac says to his mother, I'm however old, 40 something, I'm old, I'm an adult now, you shouldn't have to be taking care of me anymore. And that is the guilt that comes, I believe, in my observation, with somebody with schizophrenia who gets to a place of relative stability and says, oh my God, what happened to my life? How come my mother is and you did put it in the short film, but I think that's a huge thing. I know my son is so hopeful that he'll get work. And it breaks my heart that it breaks his heart that on the current medication he's on, he has some tremors, which he's finally admitting to, and that his hopes get dashed every time he tries to, at this point with his teeth soon to be fixed and his kind of tics, that he has these dreams. It's not that just that our dreams, it's not just the family's dreams that have to change. It's the people who have the illness who, especially when they're clean and sober and stable, it's painful.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I find interesting, and I have gone back and forth about when I've thought about what films I want to make and things like that, because there is a really difficult balance between trying to tell stories of hope and also telling stories that are more difficult, that might do justice to one person's experience, but is very difficult. I mentioned I did that focus group in Oakland, and I remember in that experience, there was a woman who was 6 months into this because her son, who was 18, had developed psychosis and schizophrenia, and she was lost. She had broken down crying in this group, and I was listening to her, and I realized someone like this needs stories of hope. You mentioned Bethany Iser, and there are so many stories of hope. Through this podcast, I've learned so many stories of hope. Dr. Laitman, Javier Amador, the Clubhouse movement, like all of those stories are incredible. And the difficult thing is finding balance to the people who go through this experience and are completely lost and they do not have that outcome at all. They have a loved one who may have passed away. They have a loved one who hasn't been able to get better. And you want to do justice to their experience, but you also want to be able to share stories which have hope so that someone who's new to this knows that there is something that can be better. So
Yeah.
that's a very difficult balance, and trying to find the nuance between that, I don't think I've found yet, but.
Well, I'm sure that, I mean, you can't tell all the stories in one story. And what comes to mind for me is, now the name escapes me, the movie with Mary Tyler Moore and
Ordinary
also
people.
Ordinary People, where their son, it ends up being very hopeful for what's left of their family, but some of the people that he went to rehab with, their stories are told differently. Their stories end differently. So I can't tell you how to write a screenplay. I have no idea. But I mean, there are subsidiary stories or subset stories that will tell other possible outcomes. But, many of us watch a movie of full length and we want to root for somebody to get better in some way. So it is, but I appreciate you. So we have about 10 minutes left. So what else would you like to know from us? I know you had lots of questions and
yeah. Well, the other one that I would be interested in exploring, being 22, being younger at the beginning of my career, and learning about advocacy through this podcast and kind of coming in the last few years to care more and more about this issue. I am curious what you hope to see in future generations of advocates to try and do work to help people who are living through these situations.
I'm going to take the first stab at that one because I have a 20-year-old granddaughter who I think you would enjoy talking with. She's very much starting out to be an advocate, and she was going to major in physics and some sort of math. And now, because of her Uncle Jim, she is majoring in physics and psychology. And she's hoping she has an internship that will last her through college, and then she gets to get a master's degree, and then she'll be working for one of the armed forces, and she's hoping to find a cure for schizophrenia or something. She'll put together the government money and the physics and then also the psychology. So she's coming with high hopes for the scientific breakthrough that's needed for schizophrenia. So I think her story, stories of people who want to work on the research who are young, is a form of advocacy. But I also know friends of mine's children who have started NAMI chapters on college campuses, and because of their own siblings, or because of themselves. And I think talking to some of those leaders, on the campuses, I know one of them who's now in his young adult working years. He's in his early 20s, but he did that in one of the campuses here in Minnesota. I could put you in touch. I'm sure a lot of our listeners could, to some of those young leaders that I think would be a powerful documentary or film.
Definitely. Yeah. Knowing you, Mindy, I think that your granddaughter has a good chance of success in that.
Well, she's been on the podcast, so
she's been on the podcast. She also did an internship when she was in high school with the Treatment Advocacy Center, because she lives in DC and they're in Virginia. So that was a very nice connection and got her interested. She interviewed, as part of that internship, other young people who have schizophrenia. One was Dr. Laitman's son, Daniel. So she just really caught the bug of doing something.
Yeah.
I think when you have somebody in your family, that's real kindling for these future advocates. And I mean, I just look at all my kids, and none of them are in the field of being actual advocates, but they operate in the world differently now because they're familiar with this. And they speak up for people, for strangers, it's a different mentality. And then I have a nephew who is a pediatric psychiatrist now. And the big joke in our family is he took a look around the family and decided we could have our own in-house psychiatrist. But it really was because his sister had a learning disability, and then he saw what happened with Nick, and he worked with autistic kids, and he just decided, this is where I want to make my mark on the world. And so now he's a young guy in his 30s with and also child psychiatrist they're hard to find. And he's got a good practice in Pasadena, and that's his advocacy. And I'm so proud of him and so grateful when young people go into these fields.
And I think young people speak up much more than people our age do when or people that are middle-aged, when mental illness strikes the family. Older people are more acculturated to keep it quiet for quite a while before we turn to advocacy, whereas young people are speaking out right away.
Oh yeah, my daughters don't take any crap, and they don't sit by and see anybody, strangers, anybody. And I've also taught them, when you're walking down the street and you see the guy who's in psychosis on the corner talking to himself or muttering, look him in the eye and just acknowledge that you see him and just say hello. I mean, just even if people did that, that would make a huge difference.
I think, yes, definitely. What you said a few minutes into the podcast about the power of love. We had Mary Lindsay Rausch on the podcast, the youngest of the Galvin 12 siblings, and she said she has taken on the role of caregiver for her two remaining brothers that have schizophrenia, and she says their faces light up when she visits. But not every sibling is able to do that. I know my daughter has 3 kids of her own for 2nd and 3rd grade. There's only so much she can do, but she'll take a walk with her brother, or she'll, they took a walk. It did my heart so much good to see my 2 kids take a walk around the block. Like, it's the simplest things. And they were gone longer than they planned to be because they were having a good conversation. So I think that the siblings, yes, bring your suffering out in the open, lean on each other, learn as much as you can. Very often on our YouTube channel, there are very interesting comments when we put the podcast on the YouTube channel. And one person wrote and said that she wishes that more medical students would pay more attention to their psych grounds, because there are so many doctors that think psych meds are in a totally different category from regular meds. And even as a psych nurse, when she calls for information about I hope I'm getting this right, which medication her patient is on, some of the medical students leave out the psych meds as if they're not real meds. So that was a new problem I wasn't aware of. So I think that, learn more. If you plan to study school psychology or child psychology or guidance counseling, make it your business to know about the serious mental illnesses. Talk to people, because without that knowledge, you won't be able to help people as accurately. Because I know, we've talked about this before. When my son is in high school, they're like, oh, well, maybe you should, try tough love. Like, nobody ever said to me, and I don't think they knew, this could be early signs of schizophrenia. And I'm not sure, but why don't you read this pamphlet and just keep an eye out for certain things. So I think siblings or children of people with mental illness, or nieces and nephews of people with mental illness, notice them, love them, take your pain, and communicate with other people, create a community, and advocate. Run for office, see the homeless on the street, run for mayor of your town and see if you can do something. Mindy's the only one of us that has been in politics,
but guess what? One of my Girl Scouts, I had a Girl Scout troop from 4th grade to till they graduated from high school, and we had their bridging to adulthood in the Capitol Rotunda. One of those Girl Scouts is running for the legislature this year in Minnesota, and she cares about mental illness. One of my campaign workers who worked on my campaigns from high school, or not college, until now, is running for county commissioner. So I recruited her to be on our NAMI board, and now she cares about, she already did care about mental illness. Her son is the one that actually was a campus leader that I was talking about earlier, because her other son, who's now died, had a mental illness. So the young people are our future, no question about it. And some of them are running for office, at least two that I know of that I mentored for decades.
And
I
have
don't,
any
yeah,
questions?
one more quick thing,
Yeah.
because I know that I have a friend that runs a theater company and she has a board, but she also has a youth board. She has students aged, I want to say 15 to 21, and if any organizations can have a youth board and invite young people onto their board or as advisors to their board, or just, now that's a theater company, but I don't see why a mental health institution couldn't have a leadership board of young people. I think this Gen XYZ millennial, all of you guys, like, you want to do so much and people aren't giving you the chance. And so you took the bull by the horns and just did it. But I think that giving young people the chance to do what they can be so good at, and showing them the leadership, like in Girl Scouts and places, is something. Sorry, Mimi, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, Aiden, you're like ridiculously young and you've done this powerful work. And I'm just curious, like, have you gone to film school? Are you in film school? What's
Yeah.
background that brought you to this?
So yeah, my background on that aspect, I mentioned my cinematographer, Akash, and so I met him at AFI, but I didn't go to AFI. When I was in high school, I went to LA. I would take the train to LA and I would stay in a hostel, and then I would go volunteer on sets at film schools. So I did that at AFI, at USC, UCLA, and also at the New York Film Academy, which is also in LA, as confusing as that is. But
AFI is American Film Institute, in case people
yeah,
are wondering. Okay.
yeah. And so I did that, and I met a bunch of great collaborators and creatives. And I basically decided, instead of spending like $60,000 per year to go to film school, I would just kind of jump in. So now I do lighting on sets to make money. That's kind of my main source of income. And I make these films, which is my passion and how I hope to have a career. And so I've created this film and then Crane and a few other shorts. And my goal is to, make money directing feature films as I get older. But yeah.
Okay. And your website is Aiden Keltner, Aiden is Aiden, Keltner, KELTNER.com. Can people reach you through your website with?
Yeah, my email is on my website, and you can also reach me directly at my email at aiden.keltner@gmail.com. So yeah.
And we have just a couple of minutes. Any last minute questions, comments,
Well,
thoughts?
I just want to say thank you again for the work that you all do. It's been really great getting to visit both you, Mindy and Randye, and I'm excited to meet you in person, Mimi.
Track you down.
Yeah. So I'm super excited connecting with all of you guys in the future. So thank you again.
Well, thank you. And I feel like, with 22-year-olds like you, the world's going to be in good hands. So
Thank you.
thank you. Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode of Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches, with Randye K., Mindy Greiling, and Miriam Feldman. To get in touch with us or to learn more about our books, please visit our websites at miriam-feldman.com, mindygreiling.com, or randyk.com.